He called me stupid, threw my bags on the lawn like trash. My husband, no, my ex-husband, just destroyed 10 years of marriage in 60 seconds. But what he didn't know, the poor nobody he married was about to show him the biggest mistake of his life. Before we dive into this story, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when a billionaire realizes he just threw away everything. Now, let me tell you how this all went down. My name is Angela, and that day, standing on that circular driveway, with my suitcases scattered around me like broken promises, I made a decision. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to let karma do what karma does best. You see, my husband Brandon thought he knew everything about me, thought I was just some regular woman he picked up from the streets, saved from a life of struggle. He loved telling that story at his fancy parties, how he found me working 2 jobs, how he gave me a better life. What he didn't know was that every word of that story was about to come back and slap him so hard, he'd wish he never opened his mouth. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. 10 years ago, I met Brandon at a community center where I was volunteering on weekends. He was there pitching his tech idea to anyone who would listen. This app that would revolutionize small business management. Everyone else walked away, but I stayed, not because I thought he was special at first, but because I saw something in him. Hunger, determination. The same fire I had when I decided to leave my family's empire and make my own way. See, my full name is Angela Ruth Thompson Williams. The Williams part. That's the Williams dynasty. My family owns investment firms across 3 continents. We're worth about $4 billion, give or take a few hundred million. But nobody knew that. I left home at 22 because I was tired of people pretending to love me for me when all they saw were dollar signs. I wanted to know what real life felt like, what real love felt like. So I changed my name, got regular jobs, lived in a regular apartment. When I met Brandon, he was broke, struggling, sleeping on his friend's couch. His company was just an idea on paper. But I saw potential, not just in his business, but in him. He was kind back then, humble. He'd bring me coffee during my late shifts, talk about building something meaningful together. I fell in love with that man. 6 months into dating, Brandon needed money to launch his first product. He was desperate, going to bank after bank, getting rejected everywhere. One night, he broke down in my tiny apartment, said he was going to give up. I couldn't let that happen. Not because I loved him by then, though I did, but because I believed in what he was building. So I made a call to my family's lawyer, set up an anonymous investment through a shell company. $250,000 appeared in Brandon's account, with a simple note saying a silent investor believed in his vision. You should have seen his face. He cried, said it was a miracle, asked me to be part of his journey officially. I said yes, but not the way he thought. I worked as his assistant, his bookkeeper, his support system. I used my business degree, the one I got from Harvard that he didn't know about, to help structure his company properly. Every contract, every partnership deal, every expansion strategy, I was there, guiding him, protecting him, and I never took credit. Let him think he was the genius. Let him believe the success was all his doing. Meanwhile, through my family's firm, I kept investing. By year 3, I owned 40% of his company. He owned 35%. The rest was distributed among small investors. But Brandon never read the fine print, never questioned where that first miracle money came from. Things changed when the company hit its first billion in valuation. Suddenly, Brandon wasn't coming home for dinner, started wearing expensive suits, bought a Rolex, then another. We moved from our comfortable home into a mansion that felt cold and empty. He joined exclusive clubs, started golfing with people who had never struggled a day in their lives. And then came Tiffany. She showed up as a business consultant, all long legs and fake smiles. I saw through her immediately. But Brandon was mesmerized. She represented everything he thought he wanted now that he had money, status, glamour, the kind of woman who looked good on a billionaire's arm. I caught them in his office one evening. He didn't even look ashamed, just annoyed that I interrupted. Started gaslighting me, saying I was paranoid, insecure, jealous of his success. Said maybe if I elevated myself, took better care of my appearance, understood his world better, he wouldn't need to find intellectual stimulation elsewhere. That hurt more than the cheating. For 6 months, I watched my marriage crumble, while Tiffany moved closer into our lives. She was at company dinners, strategy meetings, even showed up at our house for pool parties. Brandon's friends and business partners would look at me with pity. Some tried to warn him, said he was making a mistake. He didn't listen. He was too busy believing his own press, thinking he was some self-made genius who deserved a trophy wife. The final explosion came on a Tuesday morning. I woke up to find Brandon packing my clothes into suitcases, not carefully, just shoving everything in, like he was disposing of garbage. I asked him what he was doing, and he turned to me with these cold eyes I didn't recognize and said he wanted a divorce, said he'd outgrown me, that I was holding him back from reaching his full potential, that Tiffany understood ambition in ways I never could. I stood there in my pajamas, watching this man I'd built up from nothing tear me down with words designed to destroy. He said I was stupid for thinking I could keep him, said I should be grateful for the years he gave me, for the lifestyle I got to experience. Then he dragged those suitcases downstairs, threw them onto the front lawn, and told me I had 1 hour to get off his property before he called security. Tiffany was there, of course, watching from the front door in one of my robes, drinking coffee from my favorite mug. She didn't say anything, just smiled. That smile told me everything. She thought she'd won. They both did. Brandon stood there with his arms crossed, looking at me like I was a pest he'd finally gotten rid of. He actually said these words. I'll never forget them. He said, "Get out, you stupid woman. You're nothing without me. You never were anything. And you never will be. Now leave before I have you removed." I could have said something right then. Could have told him the truth, watched his face crumble in real time. But that wouldn't have been satisfying enough. So I did something that confused him. I smiled, picked up my suitcases calmly, loaded them into my old car that I'd kept all these years, and drove away without a single word. In my rearview mirror, I saw him looking puzzled, like he expected more of a fight. Tiffany was already wrapping her arms around him, celebrating her victory. I drove straight to my lawyer's office, the one Brandon didn't know about. Gerald Williams, my uncle, one of the best corporate lawyers in the country. I walked in and said 2 words. "It's time." He smiled, nodded, and started making phone calls. See? That 10-year clause I'd written into the original investment contract? It had just expired, meaning I could now exercise my full rights as majority shareholder. For 10 years, I'd stayed silent, let Brandon think he was in control. But that protection period was over. By the time I got to my hotel room, Uncle Gerald called back. Everything was in motion. The board would be notified of an emergency meeting. Brandon's world was about to flip upside down, and he had no idea the earthquake was coming. I ordered room service, took a long bath, and slept better than I had in months. Freedom feels good, even when it comes wrapped in betrayal. The next morning, Brandon's lawyer, Terrence, started calling him frantically. I knew this, because Terrence was actually my family's plant, someone we'd placed in Brandon's company years ago to keep me informed and protected. Terrence told Brandon that a mysterious entity had just activated a massive shareholding position and was demanding an emergency board meeting. Brandon, confident as ever, laughed it off, told Terrence to handle it, that no shareholder could touch him. He was too busy celebrating with Tiffany, posting pictures on social media of them together, making our separation public in the most disrespectful way possible. His friends were congratulating him in the comments, talking about upgrades and living his best life. It was disgusting but expected. Men like Brandon, when they get money, they forget who held their hand in the dark. That afternoon, Terrence called again, more panicked. He'd done the research. The majority shareholder was represented by someone named Angela Thompson. Brandon went silent, asked if it was me. Terrence confirmed the legal names matched. That's when Brandon started making calls, trying to dig into his company's original funding documents. He'd never bothered to read them carefully before, just signed whatever I put in front of him, trusting me completely. Now he was scrambling, and from what Terrence reported back to me, the color drained from Brandon's face when he realized what he'd signed a decade ago. The anonymous investor he'd been thanking in every interview? That was me. The board meeting was scheduled for Monday morning. Brandon showed up in his best suit, Tiffany on his arm, because he still didn't understand the gravity of the situation. He walked into that conference room like he owned it, because he thought he did. Then he saw me sitting at the head of the table, where he usually sat. I was wearing a navy power suit, my natural hair out in a beautiful afro, looking every bit like the businesswoman I actually was. My team of lawyers flanked both sides. Uncle Gerald sat to my right. Brandon froze, literally stopped walking, and just stared. Tiffany's grip on his arm tightened as she looked around confused. I smiled politely and gestured to the chairs across from me. Please, have a seat, Brandon. We have a lot to discuss. He stumbled to his chair, couldn't take his eyes off me. I could see his mind racing, trying to piece together what was happening. So I helped him. I slid a folder across the table and began to speak. Told him everything. How my real name was Angela Ruth Thompson Williams. How my family was the Williams dynasty he'd read about in Forbes magazine. How I'd left that world to find genuine love. How every dollar that launched his company came from me. How I owned 40% of the company he thought was his empire. How I'd protected him, guided him, built him up from nothing, and he repaid me with humiliation and betrayal. You could hear a pin drop in that room. Brandon's face went from confusion to shock to horror. In about 30 seconds, he tried to speak, but nothing came out. Tiffany, on the other hand, had plenty to say. She stood up, called me a liar, said I was just bitter and making things up. That's when Uncle Gerald opened his briefcase and started laying out documents, contracts with Brandon's signature, bank transfers, corporate filings, stock certificates. Every piece of paper told the same story. I was the money behind the throne. Brandon wasn't a self-made billionaire. He was a man I'd invested in, and that investment had paid off beautifully. The other board members, some who'd suspected something like this for years, just nodded as everything was revealed. One of them even laughed, said it made sense now why Angela was always in those early meetings, why her suggestions always worked. Brandon finally found his voice, and it came out as a whisper. Why didn't you tell me? I leaned forward and looked him straight in the eye. Because I wanted you to love me for me, not for my money. I wanted to see who you really were. And you showed me, didn't you? The moment you thought you didn't need me anymore, you threw me away like garbage, called me stupid, said I was nothing. Tears were streaming down his face now. But I felt nothing. That part of my heart had closed. Then came the vote. I motioned for it formally. A vote to remove Brandon as CEO due to conduct unbecoming and violation of the morality clause in his employment contract. Yes, there was a morality clause. I'd put it there years ago, never thinking I'd need to use it. But adultery with an employee, creating a hostile work environment, financial recklessness, with company funds for personal gain, it all added up. My 40%, plus the shares held by board members who were tired of Brandon's arrogance, equaled 67%. The vote passed. Just like that, Brandon was out. Security was called to escort him from the building and collect his access cards. He begged, actually got on his knees and begged me to reconsider. Said he loved me, that he made a mistake, that he'd do anything to fix this. Tiffany had already grabbed her purse and was heading for the exit. She didn't sign up for a broke man with a scandal. In the parking lot, she told him exactly that, before driving away in the car he'd bought her. Brandon was left standing there alone, stripped of everything he thought made him powerful. I watched from my new office window as he got into an Uber, couldn't even afford his own driver anymore, since the company car was repossessed immediately. I felt a sense of peace, not happiness exactly, because there's no joy in watching someone you once loved destroy themselves, but peace knowing I'd stood up for myself and won. The company thrived under my leadership. I promoted people who'd been loyal and competent, but overlooked. Terrence became general counsel. His assistant Denise became CFO because she actually understood the numbers better than anyone. We implemented ethical guidelines, community investment programs, and profit sharing for all employees. Revenue increased by 40% in the first year because people work harder when they're treated with respect and paid fairly. Brandon, meanwhile, had to start over. The mansion was actually owned by the company as a corporate asset, so he lost that. His personal assets were substantial, but nothing compared to what he thought he had. He got a job at a competing firm in a mid-level position. I heard through the grapevine that it humbled him significantly. Having to report to someone else, having to prove himself again, it changed him. Good. About 6 months after everything went down, I ran into him at a coffee shop near my new office. He was alone, looked tired, but somehow more genuine than he'd been in years. He approached me carefully, asked if we could talk for a minute. I agreed, curious about what he'd say. He apologized, sincerely, deeply apologized. Said losing everything made him realize what he'd actually lost. That the company, the money, the status, none of it meant anything compared to losing me. He said he understood if I never forgave him, but he needed me to know. He finally understood his mistake. I accepted his apology because holding on to anger only hurts yourself. But I made it clear that accepting an apology doesn't mean reconciliation. I'd moved on. In fact, I'd started dating someone new. His name was Leonard, a high school teacher who coached basketball on weekends and volunteered at youth centers. He had no idea who my family was when we met, because I was just Angela to him, the woman who showed up to mentor kids in his program. He loved me for my laugh, my passion for helping others, my terrible cooking that he teased me about constantly. That's the kind of love I deserved all along. Brandon nodded, said he was happy I found that. Then he told me something surprising. He'd met someone too. A woman named Grace who worked as a social worker. She knew about his past, his mistakes, and loved him anyway. But she also kept him grounded, didn't let him get too big for his britches, as she put it. He was learning to be a better man. Good for him. Growth is possible for anyone willing to do the work. We talked for about 20 minutes, and it felt like closure. Not the angry, bitter kind, but the peaceful kind where two people acknowledge what was, accept what is, and wish each other well for what's coming. When we parted ways, I felt lighter than I had in years. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming so fulfilled in your own life that what hurt you becomes irrelevant. So that's my story. The day my husband threw me out and learned the hardest lesson of his life. I'm not telling you this to gloat or to say, I'm better than anyone. I'm telling you this because somebody out there needs to hear it, needs to know that your worth isn't determined by how someone else treats you. Brandon calling me stupid didn't make me stupid. Him throwing me out didn't make me worthless. His inability to see my value was his failure, not mine. And here's the thing about hiding who you really are. To test someone's love, you learn the truth. Sometimes that truth hurts, but it also sets you free. I'm remarried now to Leonard. We have two beautiful kids, and I still run my company. We use our profits to fund education programs and small business grants in underserved communities. Brandon remarried too, and from what I hear, he's genuinely happy and much humbler. Life has a funny way of teaching us what we need to learn. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment below about a time someone underestimated you and how you proved them wrong. Hit that like button if you believe in knowing your worth, and subscribe because I've got more real-life stories that'll make you think, make you feel, and maybe even change your perspective. Remember, you are never nothing. You are everything. Don't let anyone tell you different. I'll see you in the next one. Peace and blessings.